Welcome back, reading Hegel, this time the Phenomenology of Spirit, paragraph 4. So, before we have defined philosophy as something that should focus on the real issue, in German, die Sache selbst. Now, the big question is, how do we get a grasp of this real issue? If we look now into the transition to the fourth chapter, we see that culture is such a penetration of the real issue at hand. And Hegel writes, culture and its laborious emergence from the immediacy of substantial life must always begin by getting acquainted with general principles and points of view, so as at first to work up to a general conception of the real issue, as well as learning to support and refute the general conception with reasons. Okay, let's break it apart, the sentence. I mean, to me it's very clear, but people who read it, they find Hegel's language quite difficult to comprehend. So therefore, let's do it. So we do it step by step. First of all, he says that culture emerges from the immediacy of life, and it is actually a process that somehow requires labor. So I guess like we are at first born in our immediacy, and this is also true for humans who first enter the stage of world history, and they are just living for themselves from the middle, from the center of their being to the outside, and they don't consider any kind of questions of their identity within a society. However, so this substantial life begins with getting acquainted with general principles and points of views. So cultures first come up with general ideas about what the world really is and have certain belief structures. And then these cultures, they start learning to support and refute whatever they have, their belief or their general conception, with reasons. So they use reasons for why something. In a sense, they look metaphysically beyond what there is. Now, one might ask, what does that have to do with the real issue? Well, here we see. We make first a conception of the real issue, and every culture does that. And then we start to develop that kind of conception. And this contrasts, or it does not contrast, it aligns with paragraph 3, where he says, we actually should not just pass on superficial judgments. So we see it then apprehends the rich and concrete abundance of life by differential classification. Of course, the question is, what does he mean here by differential classification? And I will actually ask ChatGPT. And ChatGPT gives me a clear answer. In this context, it means the process of organizing and understanding the rich and complex aspects of life by making distinctions between different elements. Hegel uses this term to describe a crucial step in the development of culture. After grasping general principles and concepts, one must classify the diverse aspects of experience to better understand them. Specifically, Hegel is referring to the intellectual practice of breaking down the concrete abundance of life into categories or types in order to manage and comprehend them. But I also want to know whether there is a concrete historical context for this term. Let's see whether ChatGPT can delve into that question. Okay, it's not like a concrete context. So during Hegel's time, natural sciences were advancing the classification of living organisms and phenomena. Figures like Linneo had already systematized biology by creating taxonomies that differentiated species based on specific traits. This scientific approach to organizing knowledge by differences mirrors Hegel's idea of differential classification. Okay, then we have Kant and classification in philosophy. Immanuel Kant, whose work heavily influenced Hegel, emphasized the role of concepts and categories in understanding the world. Kant's critique of pure reason involves a system of classification where human understanding organizes sensory experience through concepts. Hegel's term might be seen as a continuation of this critique. And then German idealism and logic. In Hegel's philosophical environment, the focus on categories and the classification of concepts was a significant part of post-Kantian debates. Hegel sought to transcend the abstract formalism of classification, insisting that real understanding comes through the dynamic developmental nature of concepts and reality. And this is actually exactly what we will see in this paragraph here, because, and finally, like cultures learn to give accurate instructions and pass serious judgment upon it, not just like a random judgment, right? From its very beginning, culture must leave room for the earnestness of life in its concrete richness. So Hegel here is not somebody who remains on the level of abstract classification, but he says that we really have to dive into this aspect with regard to the concrete experience and with regard to real human beings. And this means that we must leave room for the earnestness of life. This leads the way to an experience of the real issue. So only then, if we combine the classification that culture has undertaken with respect to the earnestness of life, then we get down to the real issue. And even when the real issue has been penetrated to its depths by serious speculative effort, so now we really think about the issue at hand by virtue of speculation, then, however, this kind of knowing and judging will still retain its appropriate place in ordinary conversation. So I don't know why he says here even, and you know my strategy. Before I read this too long, I will just ask ChatGPT. So let's switch screens again. Of course, now my computer freezes. You cannot see that here. But yeah, let's think about it for a second. Yeah, my computer is completely frozen. Okay, here we go. Where's my mouse? Okay, so let's go on. So why does Hegel say even in this sentence? So even when the real issue has been penetrated, it seems like the culture does not achieve yet a complete understanding. So to emphasize that despite the achievement of profound understanding through speculative philosophy, the more straightforward forms of knowing and judging, which are involved in everyday discourse, still have a legitimate and necessary role. The word even underscores a contrast. One might expect that once the real issue has been deeply understood through speculative thought, these simpler everyday ways of thinking and discussing might no longer be relevant. However, Hegel insists that they retain their importance by using even, okay, so it's a little bit different from my interpretation, but I think it's correct. And even when the real issue has been penetrated to its depth by serious speculative efforts, this kind of knowing and judging will still retain its appropriate place in ordinary conversation. But why is it important to point out, like, well, let me ask ChatGPT, but why is it important that he emphasizes that this kind of knowing will retain its place in ordinary conversation? And now also tell me what retain means. I know this might maybe for English speakers a simple word, but yeah, preserve or keep, yeah. So yeah, so please, he emphasizes that even after penetrating the depths of philosophical inquiry, simpler, more everyday forms of understanding and judgment are not discarded or rendered useless. Okay, I understand that. But why should they lose that? Hegel emphasizes this because he wants to show that speculative philosophy doesn't make everything, everyday reasoning irrelevant, okay? Rather, the two coexist and are part of a continuum. Okay, I can agree with that. And even after achieving the most profound insights people still need to navigate practical life and communicate with others in more ordinary terms. This is important because Hegel's philosophy is deeply concerned with the unity of thought and life, theory and practice. By emphasizing that everyday modes of thought retain their place, Hegel is showing that profound speculative thinking doesn't alienate us from practical world or from ordinary human interactions. It enriches and informs them. Now, how should we read it in the context of the phenomenology of spirit? Well, it is my suggestion here that Hegel believes that in the end of the phenomenology of spirit, we somewhat comprehend reality. And this seems always to be then that we are lost in speculative thought and that Hegel is somebody who stands on his head, as Marx says, that we have to put him from his head to his feet. But actually we see here that he says, well, the real issue of experience, the one that is in front of us, will always remain important. And this is the decisive difference where he distinguishes himself from Kant, who is actually accused of living in something that is called abstract reason, that has no relationship with regard to practice. And the way of how Hegel wants to accomplish or tie his philosophy back to the real world, to practical relevance, is by exactly focusing on the real issue. Now, I follow here an interpretive line that, for example, Tom Rockmore defends heavily, and that is that his phenomenology of spirit, to the surprise of many, is indeed a phenomenology. Because why should something that is called a phenomenology of spirit be a phenomenology? Well, that would be surprising, at least, I guess, or not. Well, it is indeed a bit absurd because phenomenology is a movement of the 20th century that was initiated somewhat by Husserl and includes also a focus on the real issue, as much as Hegel says it here. And in fact, it departs very much because Hegel emphasizes more of a kind of continuum between the immediate experience that we have and the speculative thought that comes with it, but they are not separated. It seems to me Husserl wants to bracket everything off, like the I and the ideas of the real world, and then take our phenomenal experience as something that could be investigated in itself and lead us to real evident matters, whatever that is, evidences. I don't know how to translate that into English in the appropriate way because I'm not a Husserl expert, although I studied his theory. Now, why is Hegel, however, a phenomenology? Because he indeed says that we always have to take our experience serious in the way it corrects our logical concepts that at some point become unbearable, especially when the real world is pressing. Now, I hope that this kind of discussion of this paragraph helped you and that you will tune in the next time when we read paragraph 5. My life goal is to read through the whole book like this. I guess like AI will do that earlier than me producing such videos, but if you enjoy it, then please comment and subscribe. So live long, read more Hegel, and prosper.